Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Tuesday. Let's light up the darkness. Big day. We begin our catch-up. We got, I think it's 6 pages. It's either 5 or 6 pages behind during Passover. And we needed to catch up. I didn't want to do it right away because we had such big, rich, interesting pages as we came out of the holiday and we're completing chapter 1 here in Tractate Sota. But now that we're in chapter 2 and we're back into some of the technical rules of how the Sota ritual was carried out in the Holy Temple, this is a good time. So today we're going to do pages, highlights. We're not going to do the complete pages, but important highlights from pages 15, 16, and 17 so that we're getting caught up. And then, either tomorrow or the next day that really makes sense, we'll do another 2 or 3 pages in one day, and then we'll be back on the Daf Yomi schedule. Who's in the house? Bill in Mid-Missouri, Melissa in Great Neck, Paul in the Great Northwest, Franco checking in from Italy and Trieste, Joe in the Inland Empire, Jonathan is glad we're catching up. Me too. Marjorie joining us on the YouTube side, Ella, Lynn in North Texas, Marie in Freeport. Welcome, everybody. Let's do this. We're going to pick it up towards the bottom of page 14b. As I mentioned here in chapter 2, we're starting to talk about, this is Tractate Sota, the 18th volume of the Talmud, the laws of the suspected adulteress. In chapter 1, we covered the warning. The husband told his wife, hey, what are you doing talking to that guy? Do not do that again. Do not seclude yourself with that man. He said that in front of 2 witnesses. Then she secluded herself with that particular man, an inappropriate thing to do, in front of 2 witnesses. We don't know exactly what happened behind the closed door, but they had the opportunity to commit adultery. So she becomes the suspected adulteress. At this point, the husband and wife are prohibited to each other until they go on this road trip. They go to Jerusalem. Of course, can't do this now, but when the temple was standing up until the second temple fell almost 2,000 years ago, they would go to the temple, and now the priest would administer this rite, this ritual, where she would, first they would warn her that if you really committed adultery, then drinking this water, the bitter water, will kill you. So just admit it. You're going to have to divorce your husband, but you won't die. And if you're innocent, okay, so drink the water. You'll survive the ordeal because you're innocent. And now the husband and wife are going to become permitted to each other again and hopefully never have another such episode in their married lives. Now, when she is standing in the temple, as we covered yesterday, she's holding the meal offering of the Sota. That's a special offering, unlike all other meal offerings, which were made out of fine flour. The Sota's meal offering is more of a coarse barley offering. And then how is that offering brought and what surrounds it? That's where we are now. So at the bottom of near the bottom of 14b, so the Brisa states, and he, the priest, removes its frankincense to one side, right? Because all meal offerings are offered with some olive oil and frankincense. So he removes the frankincense to one side. Why? The Gemara explains this is done in order that the frankincense not be removed along with the meal offering when the priest removes a handful, which is going to be offered on the altar. And as we learned in a Mishna at Menachos 6a, if the priest removed the handful of the meal, in this case the barley flour, and along with it a pebble or a grain of salt or a crumb of frankincense came into his hand, then the meal offering would be invalid because the part that's given on the altar has to be pure, just the meal, just the flour. And so the Baraisa continues, and he removes a handful from the place where its oil has accumulated. And the Gemara asks, from where do we derive this? As it is written, and he shall take from there his handful of the fine flour thereof, and of the oil thereof. Leviticus 2:2. So the Torah also states, and the priest shall make the memorial part of it smoke, right? This part of the meal offering that's offered on the altar is burned there, it's consumed. Where am I? The oil thereof. The priest shall make the memorial part of it smoke, even of the groats thereof and of the oil thereof. Leviticus 2:16. So the handful should be taken from the area where there is an abundance of oil, right? Oil and flour is what goes up on the altar, but not the frankincense or any other substance. Now, so the Baraisa continues. And he, the priest, puts the handful into a service vessel, and he sanctifies it in the service vessel. So the Gemara asks, why do I need this sanctification? He has already sanctified it once when he initially brought it to the temple. And the Gemara responds, the sanctification here is just as with the blood of the offerings. Although the knife sanctifies the blood by contact with the neck of the animal when you bring an animal offering, so since the knife itself is a service vessel, a service utensil, let's say, the priest sanctifies it again when he collects it in the service vessel. And here too it is not different. The meal offering must be sanctified twice. So the Baraisa continues, and he gathers its frankincense and puts it on top of the handful. And the Gemara cites the source, as it is written, and he shall take up from his handful of the fine flour, of the meal offering, and of the oil thereof, and all the frankincense which is upon the meal offering. And the Baraisa continues, and he then brings it up and burns it in the service vessel. And the Gemara asks, does he really burn it in a service vessel? Rather say he brings it to the altar in a service vessel in order to burn it. And the Baraisa continues, and he salts it and places it on the fires. And the Gemara cites the source, as it is written, and every meal offering of yours you shall season with salt. And the Baraisa continues, after the handful is sacrificed, the remainders of the meal offering are eaten. Who eats them? The priests, right? Just like the priests can eat of a sin offering, they can eat of a meal offering. In fact, the meal offering normally is part of a sin offering, or is the poor man's sin offering, right? When a poor man commits a sin, a transgression unintentionally, when any Jew commits a sin unintentionally and the temple is standing, so he can bring a chatas, right? That's the sin offering. And a rich man would bring a mammal offering, and a middle-class guy would bring birds, and a poor man would bring a meal offering. So that's called the variable sin offering. And so when a poor person brings it, it's the meal offering. But like any sin offering, the person bringing the offering does not eat any of it. Some of it is burned on the altar, and the rest is given to the priests. It's a gift to the priests who are running the temple, that they can eat of the sin offerings. And in fact, they must eat some of the sin offering in order for the sin offering procedure to be complete. Where am I? In the hand. So the Gemara asks, from where do we derive this? As it is written, and he shall bring it to Aaron's sons, the priests, and the priest shall make the memorial part thereof smoke upon the altar. So the memorial part of a meal offering is the handful, and it is written afterward, but that which is left of the meal offering shall be for Aaron and his sons. Now the Baraisa uses the phrase, after the handful is sacrificed, and this phrase can be understood according to one sage as he holds, and according to another sage as he holds, as it is stated that there is a dispute between the sages. From when does the sacrifice of the handful render the remainder of the meal offering permitted for consumption by the priests? And Rabbi Hanina says it is when the fire takes hold of it, i.e. when it ignites. And Rabbi Yochanan says it is when the fire consumes most of the handful that is offered on the altar. And each of these Amoraim, the rabbis of the Gemara, understand the Baraisa in accordance with his opinion. And the Baraisa continues, and the priests are permitted to put wine and oil and honey in the remainder of the meal offering. Right? And what is the reason? The verse states, with regard to the gifts given to the priests, and I, behold, I have given you the charge of my terumas, for a consecrated portion. Right? God has given to the priests that they can eat part of the offerings that are brought in this case the sin offerings, and that's at Numbers 18:8. And the phrase for a consecrated portion indicates that the gifts are given as a mark of greatness and should be eaten in the manner that kings eat. Meaning, when the priests receive, right, some of the meat from an animal offering or some of this, meal and oil from a meal offering, so when they eat it, they shouldn't suffer as they eat it. It's either cooked meat or properly prepared flatbread, as it were, and it can be eaten with oil, with with honey, and these other sort of side dishes to make it a little bit tastier in the manner that kings eat. And the Brisa concludes, and they are prohibited only from allowing the meal offerings to become leavened. They can do anything they want with the meal offerings, but they can't make it into leavened bread. And the Gemara cites the source as it is written with regard to meal offerings, it shall not be baked with leaven. Their portion I have given it of my offerings made by fire, Leviticus 6:10. And Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says, one should read the verse as if the phrase their portion is part of the same phrase as the prohibition of baking with leaven. And this teaches that even their portion, i.e. the portion given to the priests, shall not be baked with leaven. Now we're going to start skipping forward a little bit so that we can catch up, since we're covering 3 pages today. The Gemara is going to continue comparison of the Sotah's meal offering with the poor man's sin offering, meaning a meal offering that is attached to a sin offering, and sort of comparing those two procedures. And then it's going to compare the sin offering of a mitzora, right? A mitzora at the conclusion of their purification from tzara'as, the skin condition that no longer exists, but existed when the temple was standing, and people would get it basically if they committed lashon hara, right, to a sufficient degree over time. If they kept speaking gossip and tale-bearing and gossip-mongering, eventually they would develop this skin condition that a priest would have to examine, say that, yes, you are a mitzora, at which point they have to quarantine themselves from the rest of the community, think about what they've done, go through a purification, shave off all the hair on their bodies. And that's actually this week's Torah portion that we're now reading in Tazria Mitzora. Exactly this, right? This is not a nice coincidence. And so the Mitzora would have to shave his whole body and then bring certain offerings at the end of that purification, including this, the sin offering of a Mitzora. And so that meal offering has certain particulars, and that's going to be compared to the meal offering of the Sota. And also the sin offering of a Nazir, which requires libations, and that's compared to the offerings of the Sota. So the Mishna states that Rabban Gamliel says, just as her actions were the actions of an animal, right, when she got into this flirtatious behavior, even if she didn't commit adultery, the fact that her husband warned her, don't seclude yourself with that man in front of witnesses, and then she secluded herself with that man, and witnesses saw that, she's acting in this inappropriate manner, which Rabban Gamliel says is animal-like behavior. So since her actions were the actions of an animal, so too her offering is animal food. And it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabban Gamliel says to the sages, scribes, permit me, and I will explain it as a type of decorative wreath, a chomer, meaning an allegory. Now we're on 15b. And why did Rabban Gamliel speak up? It was because he heard Rabbi Meir saying an alternative explanation, that she fed him, i.e. her lover, delicacies from around the world, right, when she was trying to seduce or be seduced by her adulterous lover. You can imagine that they were having fine delicacies as part of their running around. And so since they shared delicacies from around the world, therefore her offering that she brings in the temple as a sota is animal food. And Rabban Gamliel said to Rabbi Meir, your explanation works out well in the case of a rich sota who was having delicacies with her adulterous lover, but what is there to say if she is a poor sota? Rather, the reason she brings an offering of animal food is just as her actions were the actions of an animal, so too her offering is animal food. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 2. Now we're going to go to Mishnah number 2. Mishnah 2. The priest would bring an earthenware drinking vessel, a paele, and he would pour into it half a lug of water from the basin in the temple. And Rabbi Yehuda says, this is the bitter water that's now being made. So Rabbi Yehuda says the priest would pour only a quarter lug of water. Just as Rabbi Yehuda minimizes the writing, as he requires that less be written on the scroll of the Sota than do the rabbis, so too he minimizes the amount of water to be taken from the basin for the erasing of the text. Remember that what makes the bitter water, as we shall see, is the water in an earthenware vessel, some dirt from the temple floor or the ground on the Temple Mount, and then these verses of the Sota from the Torah are written out on a scroll and placed in the water, and the ink dissolves off the scroll and goes into the water, and that mixture is the bitter water that she will drink from to prove her innocence. And so Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with the rabbis about how much text from the Torah should be copied onto that scroll. So the priest would enter the sanctuary and turn to his right. And there was a place there on the sanctuary floor with an area of a cubit by a cubit, and a marble tablet, tavla, was there. And a ring was fastened to the tablet to assist the priest when he would raise it. Do you understand? In the days that of the tabernacle, right? So the 40 years wandering in the desert, and then about 400 years when all the sacrifices were being offered still in the tabernacle, the tent that they erected when the children of Israel were wandering in the wilderness. Okay, so inside the tent, there was a dirt floor. But once Solomon built the temple, and eventually the first temple fell, and then the second temple was rebuilt, in both cases, it was a marble floor throughout that whole area. So where are you going to get dirt from the dirt floor? For this special purpose, they had a cutout in the floor, and they would lift up sort of the trap door, this tablet, and then they could access some dirt from beneath the floor. A marble tablet was there, and a ring was fastened to it so the priest could raise it. And the priest would take loose dust from underneath it and place the dust into the vessel with the water so that the dust would be visible upon the water, as it is stated, Numbers 5:17, and the priest shall take holy water in an earthen vessel, and of the dust that is on the floor of the tabernacle, the priest shall take and put it into the water. That's the Mishnah. Here's the Gemara. We're just going to read the first paragraph of it, then we're going to skip a bit. The sages taught it must be a new earthenware vessel. This is the statement of Rabbi Yishmael. And the Gemara asks, what is the reasoning of Rabbi Yishmael? And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Yishmael derives this by means of a verbal analogy between vessel in the case of the Sota at Numbers 5:17, and vessel from the case of the Mitzorah at Leviticus 14:5. Now, just as there, with regard to the Mitzorah, a new earthenware vessel is required, so too here, a new earthenware vessel is required. In other words, this procedure of the Sota is dramatic, traumatic, and particular to this couple, right, and this Sota and her husband. And we're not going to reuse the same vessel for every couple that comes here for the Sota ritual. Rather, we're going to have these are very cheap, right? Earthenware vessels are inexpensive, unlike other service vessels in the temple, as we talked about yesterday, that are made of gold and silver. But for this rather, seamy affair, as it were, everyone wishes we weren't here, but okay, we're going to test her. And for that, a new earthenware vessel, particular to this couple, is going to be used. Now we skip a bunch of paragraphs and we get near the bottom of page 15b, and the Mishnah continues, and it was just talking about, where they collected the water from the basin and how much water is used in the temple, etc., for this purpose. And the Mishnah continues, there was a place there on the sanctuary floor, talking about the tablet and the dust, with an area of a cubit by a cubit and a marble tablet that was there with a ring fastened so it could be raised. Now, when the priest would raise this tablet, he would take loose dust from underneath it and place the dust onto the vessel with the water so that the dust would be visible upon the water, as we just read. And the sages taught in a baraisa, if the verse had stated only, and of the dust that is on the floor, one might have thought that the priest could prepare the concoction from dust from outside the sanctuary and bring it in afterward. Therefore, the verse states, the dust that is on the floor of the tabernacle, indicating that the dust must be from inside the sanctuary. And now, if the verse had stated only on the floor of the tabernacle, one might have thought that the priest may dig with axes to loosen the dust there. Therefore, the verse states, and of the dust that is on the floor of the tabernacle, indicating that the dust must be lying there loosely. How so? If there is already loose earth there on the sanctuary floor, bring it. And if there is none there, then place loose dust there from elsewhere and then pick it up and use it. It is taught in another baraisa. The verse states, and of the dust that is on the floor of the tabernacle. The fact that the verse does not explicitly state to take the dust from the floor of the tabernacle teaches that the priest would prepare dust from outside and bring it into the sanctuary. Now, when the verse states the dust that is on the floor of the tabernacle, Issi ben Yehuda says that this phrase serves to include the floor of the tabernacle when it stood in Shiloh, Nob, and Gibeon, right? So this is the Mishkan, the tabernacle, after the children of Israel entered Israel, and then for hundreds of years, right, before Solomon built the temple, the sacrifices were brought at that tabernacle and the altar outside of it. But the tabernacle itself stood in a few different places before it was brought to Jerusalem. So it stood in Shiloh and in Nov and in Gibeon. And also the eternal house, that refers to the temple, right? Once the holy temple was built. Now, the dust for the Sota is still brought from the ground of the sanctuary, wherever it is located, even after the Jewish people are no longer in the wilderness when these laws were first given. Okay, now we're on 16a. We're going to skip Issi ben Menachem's derivation of how they know to bring the dust from the floor wherever the tabernacle is. And now a dilemma was raised before the sages. So if there is no dust there, what is the law? May one place ashes in the vessel instead? So we already saw that, well, there is no dust there, you could bring in some dust. So now what they're asking is, okay, well, do we have the alternative to bring in, rather than dust, ashes? Ashes are similar to dust, right? Ashes seem to be very similar to dust. So can we use ashes for this purpose as opposed to dust? That's the question that's being asked. May one place ashes in the vessel instead? And the Gemara responds, there's no need to raise the dilemma if one holds in accordance with the opinion of Beis Shammai. As Beis Shammai, the school of Shammai, the followers of Shammai, they say when we never find ashes referred to as dust in the Torah. Now we're going to go on an extended discussion for the next 2 pages that we're going to skip, where they're making this distinction in all different examples in the Torah. Bottom line, we often talk about dust and ashes. And what we mean by that is dust and ashes, not some kind of mixture, or not to use these terms interchangeably, because dust and ashes are 100% not the same thing. That's what they're going to derive here. And so we skip forward to 16b, where the question is asked, okay, so can we, so basically they derive you cannot use ashes for this purpose, right? The Torah says dust and ashes are not the same thing, and therefore you cannot use ashes, you can only use dust. So then somebody asks, well, can we use decomposed vegetable matter? And the interesting thing is, yes, you can use that, because decomposed vegetable matter, right, like old rotting plants, when it finishes rotting, becomes dust. But ashes, right, the product of burning, that never becomes dust. It remains ashes. It's interesting. I mean, you could say, well, ashes eventually, they if they're around for a long time, they get lighter and lighter and more, broken up. And it'll certainly resemble, fine ashes that are all ground up are very similar to dust, aren't they? But no, they're not, because the organic matter has been burned, and then when it's burned, it becomes something different. Burning changes under Torah law, burning changes a substance into another substance. Rotting and decomposing does not. And of course, this should remind us a little bit of the very, very strong Jewish law that a body, right, when a person dies, we do not cremate, right? We bury, and when you say dust to dust, right, you come from dust, you go back to the dust. A body will become dust again when it is buried in the ground. But if you cremate a body and it becomes ashes, so you've transformed it into something else that is not dust and will never be dust. Now, the Mishna states that the priest would take loose dust from underneath the tablet and place it into the vessel with the water so that the dust would be visible upon the water. And the sages taught in the Tosefta at 1:8, 3 items are required to be seen, right? It's not enough to just mix it up. It has to be visibly there. The dust of the Sota must be visible in the water. The ashes of the red heifer must be visible when placed in the waters of purification. And the spittle of a woman whose husband, who has a brother, died childless, right? A Yavama. We talked about when we were in Tractate Yavamos that when a man dies, leaving a wife and no children, and he has a brother, so then the brother and the widow are obligated to each other to perform yibum. They marry, and their first child becomes the heir of the brother who died before he had children. They don't have to get married. They can perform the chalitzah ceremony instead of getting married. Part of the chalitzah ceremony is that she spits, and that spittle has to be visible. People have to witness that, right? And that she spits, and that he didn't marry me, and removes his shoe, and it's a visible ceremony, and says, so is done to the man who does not build up his brother's house, etc. So because spitting is part of that ritual, the spittle itself has to be visible. Likewise, the ashes of the red heifer, when the temple was standing, nobody could enter the temple grounds if they were tameh, right? And if you became tameh, ritually impure, by entering a cemetery or attending a funeral or embalming a body or in any way touching a corpse, so that's, human corpse tuma, which requires the 7-day purification we've often talked about. And on the 3rd and 7th day of that purification, a person is sprinkled with the waters of purification. The waters of purification have mixed into them the ashes of the red heifer, a pure red cow that was slaughtered outside, kind of on the mountain across from the Temple Mount, but visible from the Temple Mount. It's slaughtered and then it's burned entirely. And then those ashes are collected, brought back to the temple, and from time to time, some of those ashes would be mixed with this pure spring water, and that's the waters of sprinkling. And in that case also, the ashes of the red heifer have to be visible in the water. And then in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, they said even the blood of the bird used in the Mitzora's purification ritual is required to be visible in the vessel. Just another example of a ritual where one of the substances that's mixed with another has to remain visible in that mixture. Skip a few more paragraphs. And the rabbis taught in the Tosefta at Para 6:6. This is about the paraduma, I'm sure, about creating the waters of sprinkling from the red heifer. So if one places the dust in the vessel before the water, the mixture is unfit, but Rabbi Shimon deems it fit. And the Gemara asks, what is the reasoning of Rabbi Shimon, right? Since we said that the dust has to be visible, the dust for the Sotah's mixture, the bitter water, that dust has to be visible upon the water. Meaning the water goes in the earthenware vessel first and the dust goes in afterwards, and some of that dust will, probably float on the surface. So they're asking, okay, well, if you put the dust in first and then the water, have you rendered this mixture unfit? Right? So the rabbis say, yeah, it's unfit. Rabbi Shimon would allow it. So what is the reasoning of Rabbi Shimon? It is as it is written with regard to the red heifer, and for the unclean they shall take of the dust of the burning of the purification from sin, and running water shall be put thereto in a vessel, And it is taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Shimon said, is it dust that is taken, but isn't it really ashes? So evidently the Torah altered its usage and referred to ashes as dust in order to derive a verbal analogy from it. Dust is stated in the verse here, and dust is stated there. And with regard to the Sotah, so just as there, with regard to the Sotah, the verse teaches that the dust must be placed on top of the water. So too here, with regard to the red heifer, one learns that the dust, in which case metaphorically dust, but what we're talking about is ashes, must be placed on top of the water. Right? Now, when you read this and you're like, okay, the sages have drawn a firm, bright line distinction between dust and ashes. But now we learn that the Torah, in the passage of the red heifer, discusses the ashes of the red heifer and uses the word dust to talk about them. And this is one of the many situations where you need the Torah Shebaal Peh, the Torah, the oral Torah, right? The oral tradition that we're studying here. Otherwise, you wouldn't know what the written Torah is saying. And you should know that it is so, because there's a lot of places, like as we've talked about, tefillin, right? Tefillin, the black box and the straps, and the black box that goes on the head and the straps that go around the neck. That's tefillin, but you would never know what tefillin is without the oral tradition, because the written Torah only says you shall bind these words as a sign upon your hand and as a symbol before your eyes. And from that, we would know the black box with the verses of the Torah inside, the black leather straps, etc. We wouldn't know that, but that was a tradition given to Moses at Mount Sinai. It was kind of a core group of laws given at Mount Sinai. And more importantly, perhaps, those core laws are obviously very important, but along with them, a procedure, a system, that there would be elders and sages in every generation who would come together and follow the system so that they could answer novel questions that didn't even exist at the time that the written Torah was given. And with that, we conclude our discussion of Mishnah number 2. Now we're on 17a, and we're going to read Mishnah number 3. Of chapter 2. So when the priest comes to write the scroll of the Sota that is to be placed in the water, from what place in the Torah passage describing the Sota, Numbers 5:11 through 31, does he write? Right? Does he write all 20 verses of the Torah? No, he does not. So what subset of the verses discussing the Sota procedure are actually going to be written onto that scroll, and then the ink dissolves into the bitter water? So, says the Mishnah, the priest starts from the verse, quotes, if no man has lain with you, and if you have not gone astray to defilement while under your husband, you shall be free from the water of bitterness that causes the curse. Numbers 5:19. And this continues, but if you have gone astray while under your husband, meaning under the authority of your husband, and if you are defiled, and some man has lain with you besides your husband, Numbers 5:20. And then the priest does not write the beginning of the following verse, which states, then the priest shall cause the woman to swear the oath, to swear with the oath of cursing, and the priest shall say to the woman at Numbers 5:21, but the priest will do the continuation of that verse, the Lord shall make you a curse and an oath among your people when the Lord will cause your thigh to fall away and your belly to swell. And this water that causes the curse shall go into your bowels and cause your belly to swell and your thigh to fall away. Numbers 5:21 through 22. But he does not write the conclusion of the verse, and the woman shall say, Amen, Amen. Right? So, in other words, what's being written on the scroll, the gist of the matter, right? If you're innocent, you're going to be fine. If you're guilty, you're going to die, and it's going to be a horrible death, right? But we don't write the sort of the stage directions that are included in the Torah. That doesn't get written onto the scroll that is dissolved into the waters themselves. Now, Rabbi Yosei says he does not interrupt the verses, but rather he writes the entire passage without any omissions. He leaves in the stage directions, right? So Rabbi Yosei would say, no, he writes Numbers 5:19 through 21, all the verses, doesn't leave anything out. And Rabbi Yehuda says He writes nothing other than the curses recorded in the final verses cited above. The Lord shall make you a curse and an oath among your people, when the Lord will cause your thigh to fall away and your belly to swell. And this water that causes the curse shall go into your bowels and cause your belly to swell and your thigh to fall away. And he does not write the conclusion of the verse, and that the woman shall say, Amen, Amen. That's Mishnah number 3. Gemara. With regard to what issue do the sages in the Mishnah disagree? What is the basis of their disagreement about what words are going to be included on the scroll dissolved into the water and what is not going to be included? What is the principle here? So they disagree concerning the proper interpretation of the verse, Numbers 5:23, and the priest shall write these, ha'ele, curses, es ha'alot, in a scroll. So Rabbi Meir, the first Tana of the Mishnah, reasons like this. The word alot, curses, is referring to actual curses. The prefix ha, meaning the, in the word ha'alot, serves to include curses that come on account of the blessings, i.e. the curses that are inferred from the phrase, you shall be free from this water of bitterness that causes curse. If you are innocent, you shall be free from the curses that this bitter water will bring. The word ele, meaning these, is a limiting term that serves to exclude the long list of curses that are recorded in the Mishnah Torah, meaning the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28. Now, although these curses are also referred to as alot, the priest does not write them. So the addition of the definite article in the word ha'ele serves to exclude commands recorded in the Sota passage and the acceptances by the word amen recorded there as well. The priest need not write these sections of the passage, the stage directions. And Rabbi Yosef interprets it like this. It would all be as you, Rabbi Meir, said. However, the additional word et in the verse amplifies its scope, and it serves to include both commands and acceptances, as they must be written in the scroll as well. The stage directions should be included. And why does Rabbi Meir disagree? As a rule, he does not interpret the additional word et, right? As we've talked about, in Hebrew, the word et just indicates that a direct object is coming to follow a verb, and it's just a syntactical word. Some of the sages say, no, there's no extra words, even though Hebrew has this syntax word. When it occurs in the Torah, and it occurs thousands of times, it's to bring some additional meaning. And as for Rabbi Yehuda, he interprets all of the terms in the verse as exclusionary. The word alot, curses, is referring specifically to the actual curses recorded in the verses. The definite article ha in ha'alot serves to exclude curses that come on account of blessings. The word ele serves to exclude the curses recorded in the Mishnah Torah. And the definite article in the word ha'ele serves to exclude the commands and acceptances recorded in the verses, right? So it's how they interpret the syntax of the language and the exclusionary terms is how they come up to a different understanding of what needs to be written in the Torah. So where did the law come out? What is the halacha? The priest writes the scroll of the Sota from the verse. Wait a minute, I just want to make sure. And then he's going to... Yeah, so it's all in accordance with Rabbi Meir, the first Tana of the Mishnah, right? So Rabbi Meir is listed first, and the law follows Rabbi Meir. It's the way that he explained it. We skip a few paragraphs, and now Rabbi Akiva taught, if a man, Ish, right, the word Ish, man, and a woman, Isha, merit reward through a faithful marriage, the divine presence rests between them. Now, isn't this beautiful? Let's just stop for a second. Spiritual level of this, that when you have a marriage, right? And remember, marriage is first of all, we have a tradition that marriages are created in heaven. It's extremely difficult work to do. Elsewhere, the Talmud says that it is easier to part the Red Sea than to bring a man and a woman together in a successful marriage. And so that's why that work is left up to God himself, who arranges marriages, right? Sort of creates soulmates, etc. But now what the sages are going to... And so since God created this marriage, when the couple has peace between them, right? So they have shalom bayis, they have peace in the home, and they share values, and they don't cheat on each other. Okay, so then the divine presence rests between them, right? The presence of God is there. God is everywhere, but there's a kind of extra measure of God's attention and goodwill and the divine presence in a marriage that is working, right? And that there is peace between the husband and wife. Doesn't mean that they never fight, but it means that they're working together, growing together, etc. Just as we've learned elsewhere that, when two people sit together and discuss Torah, the divine presence rests between them. Okay, but that's while they're talking Torah between a husband and wife. Like the divine presence is always there as long as they're faithful in this marriage and building that house together, as it were. And how do we know that? Now, what's interesting is Rabbi Akiva is going to show us how the Hebrew language actually furthers this same spiritual teaching. So the word Ish and Isha are almost identical. The difference between them is the middle letter Yud in Ish, right? Ish is spelled Aleph Yud Ish, right? So Aleph Yud Ish. Isha is spelled Aleph Shin He, okay? So they both have the Aleph and the Shin, but the husband is Aleph Yud Shin, and the wife is Aleph Shin He. Right, so the husband has the letter Yud in man, and the wife has the letter He in woman. Right, so Ish and Isha. So the words Ish and Isha are almost identical. The difference between them is the middle letter Yud in the male in Ish, and the final letter He in Isha, the woman. So these two letters can be joined to form the name of God that is spelled Yud He. We don't say God's name in vain, but for the purposes of education, we can say it here, right? So when you say hallelujah, for example, you're saying hallelujah, praise, and then a name of God, right? Which normally when we're talking and learning, we would say hallelujah, so that we don't say God's name in vain. But when we actually say hallelujah, you're saying praise, and then one of the names of God, Yah, right? So I'm not going to say that again, so that we don't take God's name in vain, but you understand that Yud He is a name of God. It's also part of the four-letter name of God, right? Yud He Vav He. So that first part, Yud He, is that same name of God, the two-letter name of God. But if due to licentiousness, right, that they are committing adultery, then they do not merit reward, so the divine presence departs, leaving in each word only the letters Aleph and Shin, right? If you take God's name out of Ish and Isha, you are left with Aleph and Shin for both Ish and Isha. And Aleph Shin is Ish, fire. Right? So when spouses commit adultery, they remove the divine presence from their marriage, and what do they leave? Fire, a consuming fire that will destroy the marriage. Rava said, and the fire that consumes the woman is stronger and more immediate than the fire which consumes the man. And what is the reason for this? The letters Aleph and Shin in the word Isha are adjacent, joined together, but in the word Ish, they are not joined as the letter Yud is between them. Additionally, Rava says, for what reason did the Torah say, bring dust for the Sota? It is because she merits to be proven faithful after drinking the water of the Sota. A child like our patriarch Abraham it's because, why do they bring the dust for the Sota? It is because if she merits to be proven faithful after drinking the water of the Sota, I mean, if she is innocent, then a child like our patriarch Abraham will emerge from her. As it is written with regard to Abraham that he said, I am but dust and ashes. Genesis 18:27. But if she does not merit to be proven faithful after drinking the water of the Sota, she shall die and return to her dust, the soil from which mankind was formed. And Rava further taught, as reward for that which our patriarch Abraham said, and I am but dust and ashes, His children merited 2 mitzvahs, 2 commandments, the ashes of the red heifer and the dust of the Sota, right? Abraham's great humility and the particular version of his humility to say, I'm nothing but dust and ashes. As a reward for that, there were 2 mitzvahs that are based on dust and ashes, the dust of the Sota and the ashes of the red heifer. And the Gemara asks, but there is also another mitzvah involving dust, the dust that is used for covering the blood of a slaughtered, undomesticated animal or fowl. Right? When you slaughter, a cow, because not to bring as an offering, but just anytime you slaughter a cow or a goat or a sheep that you're going to eat, so its blood pours out, and then it's a commandment to cover up that blood, because the blood is the life, and you have to treat it respectfully. You essentially are burying the blood the way you would bury a human corpse. So there's the mitzvah of covering the blood. But the Gemara answers there, dust does not serve as an accessory to the mitzvah of covering the blood. There the dust does serve as an accessory to the mitzvah of covering the blood, but there's no benefit imparted by it. It occurs after the animal has been slaughtered and does not itself render the meat fit for consumption. And Rabbah further taught, as reward for that which our patriarch Abraham said to the king of Sodom, that I will not take a thread nor a shoe strap nor anything that is yours. This was in the story of the battle between the 4 kings and the 5 kings, where Abraham's nephew Lot was kidnapped and taken away, and Abraham rode after to rescue Lot. Did so, and when he did, he brought back all that was stolen from the king of Sodom. The king wanted to reward Abraham with, a bounty for returning all this wealth. And Abraham said, I don't want anything from you. No one is going to say that I was enriched by the king of Sodom. Right? He didn't want anything from him. So as a reward for that which our patriarch Abraham said, that I will not take a thread nor a shoe strap nor anything that is yours, distancing himself from anything not rightfully his children merited 2 mitzvahs, the thread of sky blue wool, the chalitzah that's on our tzitzis, and the strap of the phylacteries, the strap of the tefillin that I mentioned before. And the Gemara asks, granted the strap of the tefillin impart benefit, as it is written, and all the peoples of the earth shall see that the name of the Lord is called upon you, and they shall be afraid of you. And it is meaning that the Jews are visible, the Jewish men, because back then they would wear their tefillin all the time. And it is taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Eliezer the Great says, this is a reference to the tefillin of the head, upon which the name of God is written. And tefillin therefore impart the splendor and grandeur of God and are a fit reward for Abraham's conduct. This is a reward that accrued to his descendants forever. But what is the benefit imparted by the thread of sky blue wool, the chalitzah in the tzitzis? And the Gemara answers, as it is taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Meir would say, what is different about sky blue from all other colors, such that it was specified for the commandment of tzitzis? It is because sky blue dye is similar in its color to the sea, and the sea is similar to the sky, and the sky is similar to the throne of glory. As it is stated, and they saw the God of Israel. This was when there was a kind of group prophecy. When Moses, it was just too much for him to deal with all the people coming to him constantly. And so he was able to give a little bit of his gift of prophecy to some of the other elders in Israel so that they could, act as judges for cases that weren't important enough to bring to Moses. And when he did that, they had, temporarily some like visions of prophecy. And these people all saw the throne of glory, God's throne of glory. And that's at Exodus 24:10. And they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet the like of a paved work of sapphire stone, and the like of the very heaven for clearness. So we're meant to be reminded when we see the blue thread in tzitzis of the throne of glory. And the verse shows that the heavens are similar to sapphire, and it is written, and above the firmament that was over their heads was the likeness of a throne, as the appearance of a sapphire stone. Ezekiel 1:26. Therefore, the heavenly throne is similar to the heavens, and the color of sky blue dye acts as an indication of the bond between the Jewish people and the divine presence. That concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 3. Here's Mishnah number 4. The priest does not write the scroll of the Sota upon a wooden tablet, and not upon paper made from grass, and not upon diphthera, a hide that is only partially processed, as it is salted and treated with flour, but not gallnuts. Rather, it must be written only on a scroll of parchment, meaning the kind of parchment that we use to write a Torah on, right? A Torah scroll is written on animal hide, and that's what the scroll of the Sota has to be written on also. As it is stated, and the priest shall write these curses in a scroll. And the scribe may not write them with gum, and not with copper sulfate, nor with any substance that makes a mark and cannot be completely erased, but only with ink made from soot, as it is stated in the continuation of the same verse, and he shall blot them out into the water of bitterness. Numbers 5:23. And this indicates that the scroll must be written with a writing that can be erased in water. That's Mishnah number 4. Now the Gemara, and I am almost done. So if you have questions or comments, get them in. We're on 17b, and so we're completing our highlights journey through pages 15, 16, and 17. So the Gemara, Rava says, a scroll of a Sota that one wrote at night is unfit. What is the reason? You can't write the scroll of the Sota at night. It is derived by verbal analogy between one instance of the word law and another instance of the word law. It is written here with regard to a Sota, and the priest shall execute upon her all this law. Numbers 5:30. And it is written there with regard to judgment, according to the law which they shall teach you, and according to the judgment which they shall tell you. And just as judgment may be done only by day, right? A judge can only issue a judgment, especially in a capital case, by day. So too, the scroll of a Sota may be written only by day. And then the Gemara will say 4 other conditions that would render the scroll of the Sota unfit for use in the Sota ritual. If one wrote the scroll out of sequence, it is unfit. As it is written, the priest shall write these curses in a scroll, and they must be written on the scroll just as they are written in the Torah. If one wrote the scroll before the Sota accepted the oath upon herself, the scroll is unfit. She has to say, yes, I will drink the waters, and I accept that if I am guilty of adultery, it's going to kill me. She has to say that before the scroll is written, and if she doesn't, the scroll is unfit. And if one wrote the scroll as a letter, i.e. without first scoring lines into the parchment, then it is unfit, as the Merciful One states in the Torah, in a scroll, indicating that it must be written like a Torah scroll, in which first the parchment is scored, right? Like they take like a little blade and make parallel lines in the animal skin, just like when they write a Torah, so that all the lines are perfectly parallel, and it doesn't kind of wander, which would be disrespectful to the words of the Torah. And now at the top of 18a, and the scroll is also rendered unfit if one wrote the scroll on 2 unattached pages, as the Merciful One states, scroll, not scrolls. It has to all fit on a single piece of parchment. And finally, if one wrote 1 letter and erased that 1 letter in water, and then he wrote 1 more letter and erased that 1 letter, it is unfit, as it is written, and the priest shall execute upon her all this law. The entire passage of the Sota, that the part that gets copied onto the scroll, must all be written, and then it is placed in the water and the ink dissolves. You can't write a letter, dissolve it, write a letter, dissolve it. And that concludes our dafs for today, pages 15, 16, and 17. Let's check if Nina has passed me some questions or comments on pages 15 through 17. Here we go. Sharon. These rabbis were discussing these opinions after the temple was destroyed and the Sota ritual was not being done. So what was done in the temple while it was still standing? Shouldn't the sages have already known this? What a good question, Sharon. You would think that since, right, they're exactly like Sharon said. This discussion is going on after the temple was already destroyed and the Sota ritual was not being done anymore. As a matter of fact, the Mishna was redacted around the year 200. The temple was destroyed in about the year 70. So, for 130 years, the Mishna was already put together. And then when we're talking about the rabbis arguing about it in the Gemara, so they're talking about it hundreds of years later, right? The Gemara was put together around the year 500 of the Common Era. So didn't they know how it had been done, when it was done? Why are they deriving it in the law? I would say a couple things about that. Number one, probably the discussion of how they derived the manner in which it should be done was done, right, during the temple period, when the temple was standing, and they were actually performing this ritual. And they preserved that discussion of how they derived exactly how this thing was done. It might have evolved a little bit over time as they, had further insight, and the rabbis took over from the men of the Great Assembly and kind of becoming the sort of spiritual elders of the people. Also, this was something you can imagine in the purview of the priests. But as we, sort of passed into rabbinic Judaism, the rabbis sort of were checking the priest. The priest didn't always do everything correctly, and the rabbis were checking that. So, and also a lot of time had passed, and maybe they didn't know exactly how it was done, right? They didn't have a video record. They didn't have extensive libraries of, people taking notes of how things were witnessed and done. So to some extent, some of that knowledge may have been lost, the particulars, and had to be derived anew. Or they were just kind of, laying it out how it had been derived in earlier times. That would be my answer. I might be wrong about that. Let's see. Peggy says, were all the rabbis married? Almost. Most of the rabbis were married, but when there were a couple times where a rabbi was not married. Who were some of the rabbis that were not married? I can't remember a name right now. It was unusual, right? It was unusual for a rabbi not to be married. Because remember that, men, unlike women are not commanded to be fruitful and multiply. Because childbirth is dangerous, particularly back then. So if a woman, was scared to go through childbirth because she was afraid it would kill her, she didn't have to. But a man is obligated to reproduce, right? A man is obligated, according to Beis Shammai, to have 2 sons at least. According to Beis Hillel, which is the law, at least a son and a daughter. And until he has a son and a daughter, he has not fulfilled that obligation. And you can only have children, under Jewish law within marriage. So it would be an unusual thing for a rabbi to end up not married. Nonetheless, there were some examples of rabbis who didn't get married for one reason or another. Nina says, off topic and big question. Aoife says, if God creates all marriages, does that include the abusive ones? Not just incompatible, but when a person is fooled by a lying sociopath who abuses the spouse and the children? If so, why? Answer, that was a marriage that was not created by God. This is tricky stuff, right? No, we don't all marry the person that we should have married, right? Life gets in the way. And sometimes people marry outside of what was destined for them, right? Sort of by heaven. And so the obvious question is, well, how do you know if you're marrying the person that was intended for you by heaven, or you made some kind of bad choice and didn't marry that person? I don't know. I don't know how you can be sure. If a Jew marries a non-Jew, that's probably not the marriage that was intended for that person by heaven. If you marry a person who turns out to be a monster, I would say pretty clearly that person was not intended for you by heaven. Beyond that, we're talking about some beautiful teachings that require a lot further exploration beyond the scope of today's class. But one thing that I certainly would always say to young people, and I definitely say to my children, who are young, but God willing will be married someday. I just heard actually from my cousin. There's not that many religious Jews in my family, but these cousins are the other religious Jews, at least in our branch of the family. And they just had their first grandchild, and I was so happy for them. They're thrilled. They're over the moon. But something I say to my kids, like they, I'm sure, said to their kids, you got to marry somebody who shares values with you, right? That it's not just about, oh, we're so in love and I'm so attracted to you. And they haven't really thought through, are they trying to build the same kind of home in this world? Do they share, an objective to have children and to transmit to them the values that we're living by, right? So if people share those kinds of values, then that marriage has a much higher likelihood to succeed. No guarantee, but a much higher likelihood to succeed than people who are just pursuing an infatuation of romantic love that, like all things, could fade, and then they realize they're really not compatible people with the same objectives in this world. Yeah, that's not going to go well. Okay, and John said in an email, the rabbis make the analogy that in the Song of Songs, the people of Israel are the bride and God is singing to us about his love. And then I read in Sota 18 or 19, it's I guess tomorrow's page of the day after, about this being the drink of jealousy, the ritual of jealousy, and remembering from the Ten Commandments that God is jealous. So maybe all our travails have to do with being the Sota. Absolutely, right? And I mentioned this yesterday, that it's no coincidence that in Chabad they read this tractate, during the time, counting the days from Passover to Shavuos, when the giving of the Ten Commandments was like a marriage between God and the Jewish people, and then and so the Jewish people are the bride, God is the groom. And then so many times the Jewish people, not all of them, thank God, but portions of the Jewish people left Judaism and committed idolatry and chased after idols and, did like the evil practices of the Midianites and the Canaanites, etc. And that was like committing adultery within this marriage with God. So says John, maybe all of our travails have to do with being the Sota. We are the bride and the Sota. So every generation has to choose to drink and risk death, or admit our transgressions and live. Or maybe we drank and survived. I think more that we are continually in front of the Cohen, the priest, hair loosened, shirt torn, heart and chest exposed, offering in hand, and the Egyptian rope tied around our chest. So do we cause God's name to be erased? Do we drink? Or do we live to try again? Every generation, every person must choose. From John Hobbs, what a member of our class, what a beautiful rendering, right, of this choice that we have to make. Are we being faithful to God? Now, there's always opportunities for atonement, right? Because here's the difference between the marriage of two humans and the marriage between the Jewish people and God, right? And by extension, by the way, the marriage between all peoples and God, that, a husband and wife who cheat on each other are made prohibited to each other and they must part company. But the relationship between us and God, sometimes we compare it to a marriage, but it's also comparable to a parent and child, right? And the parent and child relationship can never be severed. So even though we may stray, God will always take us back. Right? God will always take us back. There's a core of us that, God willing, has never strayed, and that God is always waiting for it to return. And we see kind of similar analogy being made. Which one of the prophets? Just not sure which one it is right now. But he was ordered by God to marry a prostitute, so that he would understand the feeling that God has watching, his children run around on him as they go and worship other idols, right? So again, these metaphors are absolutely imperfect because we and God are not a husband and wife, and we are not parent and child. But we, depending on the context we're talking about, can use both those metaphors to illuminate the relationship and what we're talking about here. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, for at least Sota 18 and maybe